Today we return to Wyndborne Heights, but not to magisters and magic. We meet Tarrold, a man who trusted that the world would continue to behave tomorrow as it had done all his life.
Tarrold liked the hours when the light went flat and coppery the best. The day had been mild enough that his shirt clung at the back when he worked, and the wind that came up from the gullies carried only the dry smell of leaves. Fifth season, the old men called it, and Tarrold did not argue with them. He took what the land gave, and gave it what he could in return, and most days that exchange felt sufficient. His hut sat in a small clearing he had widened with his own hands over the previous 3 years, the edge of it marked by stumps and old split rounds stacked like crude walls. Beyond the trees he could see Wyndborne Heights, distant enough that the winds reached it before they reached him, but close enough that he felt steadier for having it in sight. He could not see any of the magisters from there, but he did not feel overlooked. As a place that preferred work over fuss, just as he did, the Heights gave him a feeling of assurance and security. He set the wedge against the top of the round and brought the axe down with a sure swing. The blades sank and the wood cracked and opened. Tarrold levered the halves apart with the wedge and tossed them onto the growing pile. He had cut enough for his own hearth and for the bundle he would carry up to the Heights in 2 days. They had their own stores, of course, and men who counted and tallied, but there were always practical needs, and those needs were met by hands like his. He preferred his solitude because it gave him room for thought. The forest and its wildlife were friends and neighbours enough. A squirrel scolded from a branch where it had no business, then went back to its private industry. Somewhere nearer the stream, a bird made a harsh single note and fell silent again. Tarrold did not look for meaning in it, but he did feel a certain comfort. He had learned long ago that if you started imagining messages in every sound, you would end up afraid of your own shadow. He was not a man built for fear. He was built for axes, for splitting and stacking, and knowing when a trunk would twist as it fell. He wiped his brow with the back of his wrist and glanced at the small rack beside the hut where he hung his tools. The saw needed sharpening, but it could wait. The fire inside would take easily tonight, as he had good, dry kindling, and his supper would be simple. A shape moved at the edge of the clearing, and Tarrold's hand instinctively went to the axe. Then the shape stepped fully into view, and he relaxed again. A young woman approached along the one path he kept clear. She wore a long, dark coat, and she walked confidently toward him. There was no horse with her, just a satchel at her hip and a narrow bundle under her arm that might have been a rolled paper or a thin book wrapped against the damp. When she came close enough, Tarrold nodded. He did not bow because he had done so once, years ago, to a magister who had made him feel small without meaning to, and afterwards the man had looked embarrassed and told him to stop. "Afternoon," Tarrold said. "Good afternoon, Woodsman," she replied. Her voice was clear, and she looked at him with interest. "You are Tarrold of the lower clearing." "That's me," he said. "And you're from the Heights, I'd wager. Forest folk don't walk like that." She smiled. "I'm Larine, junior magister." Tarrold scratched at the stubble along his jaw. "Aye, I've heard your name. Master Helvine mentioned you once when he came down for the fur. Said you had hands too clean for your own good. Larine glanced at her hands, as if the thought had only just occurred to her. They were clean, though the cuffs of her coat bore faint smudges. Master Helvine has a particular talent for making people feel inadequate, she said. It is how he teaches without admitting he is doing so. Tarrold grunted, amused. If you've come to tell me I'm late with something, I'm not. I've counted the bundles 3 times. No, Larine said, and stepped closer to look at the stacks. She did not touch them. She just looked over the wood at the way it was cut and placed. I didn't come for that. Tarrold waited, and the forest seemed to quiet around them, listening. Larine came to the point. There's been a small discrepancy, she said, choosing the word carefully, and Tarrold recognized the habit. Magisters were always choosing their words, worried that the wrong one might cause harm. Tarrold shrugged. I don't know about your discrepancies. My work is what it is. I know, she said. Her eyes lifted to his face again. That's why I'm here. He laughed. That's a new one. Usually it's because you want something fixed. I do, Larine said, and then corrected herself. Not fixed, checked. There's a marker stone on the path between here and the heights, the one with the iron nail driven into it. Do you know it? Tarrold nodded. Aye, it's ugly. I nearly tripped over it the first month I was here. Would you walk with me to it? She asked. Tarrold looked back toward his hut. The light was still good, but he did not like leaving tools out if he could help it. Larine's request had a politeness to it that made him curious, so he decided the quicker he went there, the quicker he could get back to his life. He drove the axe into the old stump he used as a block. Give me a moment, he said, and went into the hut to grab his coat. When he came out again, Larine was looking toward the heights. You can see it from here, Tarrold said. Yes, she replied. It's difficult not to. They took the path together, and the clearing fell away behind them. The ground underfoot was firm, scattered with dry leaves, and the mildness of the day remained. Tarrold found himself wanting to believe that whatever Larine had come to check would be small, solvable, and forgettable. How long have you been a junior magister? He asked. Silence with magisters always felt like a test. Otherwise, he would have kept to his thoughts. Long enough to learn that the title doesn't protect you from making mistakes, she said, and not long enough to feel confident that my instincts are worth trusting. Tarrold nodded. If you're asking a woodsman to walk with you to a stone, I'd say your instincts aren't too proud to be useful. Larine glanced at him, and there was a glimmer of gratitude in her eyes. Maybe that's why I came. Practical things can't pretend. They soon reached the marker stone, sitting at the side of the path where the ground dipped and half sunk into earth that had been packed hard by years of passage. The iron nail was still there, rusted but whole, hammered into the stone at an angle. Larine crouched beside it, listening. Tarrold watched her, feeling faintly ridiculous. He wanted to ask what she expected a stone to say, but he held his tongue. He knew enough to accept there were ways of perceiving things that his own mind could not. Larine eventually spoke. Do you feel anything? She asked. Tarrold frowned. He felt the usual things, the sounds of the forest, the mild chill at the back of his neck, and the ache in his arms. He shrugged. It's a stone. Yes, she said, it is. That's the point. Is something wrong with it? Tarrold asked. Larine hesitated. No, she said, and Tarrold could tell that was the closest answer she could give without lying outright. Well, Nothing that would matter to you today. I don't like that kind of answer, Tarrold said, and he kept it light, but there was truth under it. Larine met his eyes. I know, she said, and I'm sorry, but this is not something you fix with an axe. He almost laughed at her, because most things he knew how to fix involved an axe. But he didn't. He had seen too much in his years near the Heights to think his axe could solve everything. It was a good axe and a loyal tool, but it was not a god. Then why bring me to it? He asked. Larine looked away, up toward the distant towers. Because if a stone feels different, I need to know whether the difference is in me or in the world, she said. And you are out here in the world and not trying to alter it. Tarrold rubbed at the back of his neck. The path was still the same. The leaves were still dry. The air still smelled of earth. Well, he said, the world seems itself to me. Larine nodded. Good. They walked back in silence, and Tarrold found himself looking around more than usual. Everything still looked right, which should have reassured him, but instead it made him uneasy because he could not tell what had prompted Larine's caution. At the edge of the clearing, Larine stopped. She did not step fully into it, remaining beneath the first branches, reluctant to cross into Tarrold's small domain. You'll come up with the next bundles? She asked. Aye, Tarrold said. 2 days. Same as always. Larine nodded. Tarrold, if anything feels different, she began, then stopped herself. No, that's not fair. Don't go looking for differences. Just work as you do. Keep doing what you do. Tarrold blinked at her. That's the best advice I've ever had from a magister. It's because it isn't magister advice, she said. It's yours. I'm borrowing it. She turned to go, then paused. Tarrold, she said. Aye. If someone from the Heights comes down and tells you to leave your hut and come up without finishing your work, you do it, she said. Tarrold stared at her. That's not like a magister. Is this to do with your discrepancy? Larine's eyes held his for a shade too long. Then she nodded, very slightly. It may be nothing, she said, but if it isn't nothing, you will not be harmed by being closer to stone and people. Do you understand? He did not like being spoken to as if he were a child, but he saw no condescension in her, only concern. Aye, he said. I understand. Good. Then I'll go. She walked away along the path, and Tarrold watched until she vanished into the trees. He went back to his axe and pulled it free of the stump. He split another round, sharpened the saw, and stacked the last of the wood under the eaves, then went inside to light his fire. He put a pot on the hook above the hearth and poured in water from the covered bucket. He cut a piece of meat, thin as he could manage, and let it soften in the warming water. He ate standing at the table, looking out through the door at the clearing beyond. When the day finally eased into evening, Tarrold went outside again. The air was still mild, and he could smell smoke from his own chimney. It rose straight up, barely disturbed by any wind. He walked the edge of the clearing, checking the traps he kept for rabbits. One was empty, and another held nothing but a few tufts of fur where something had escaped. He shrugged and reset it. That was how it went. Tarrold made his way back to the hut, empty-handed, and that was when he first noticed the change. It was not a sound, it was the lack of it. The forest had been full of movement, only now there was nothing. Tarrold stood there, axe in hand, and listened. He could still hear his own breathing and the crackle of the fire inside the hut, but the outer world had completely flattened. Tarrold reminded himself not to imagine, but he adjusted his grip on the axe again, just in case. The mild air touched his face, and he felt nothing wrong until it came. A creeping edge of cold that betrayed itself as mist on his breath. That should have been impossible. It was not cold enough for breath to show. It had been a mild day. He had worked in his shirt. He stared at the mist and the trees, searching for an explanation. The cold deepened again, and Tarrold's first instinct was to do what he always did when the world misbehaved. He turned to the hut, to fire and shelter. He went inside and closed the door behind him. The warmth of the hut hit him, real and reassuring. The fire burned steady, and the pot on the hook steamed away. Tarrold held his hands out toward the hearth, and they warmed. He nodded, relieved, and then felt the cold again, creeping along the floorboards. He looked down. The boards nearest the door showed a whitening that spread along the grain. He knelt and touched it with his fingertips. It was cold enough to bite, and he snatched his hand back. His mind tried to make sense of it. A draught? A seep? But the hut had stood against worse, so it would be fine. He stood and went to the door, opened it, and looked out. The clearing had changed. The rich ochres and browns of the leaves had dulled. The grass at the edges had flattened under a thin film of ice that had not been there only moments earlier. The smoke from the chimney curled downwards now, pressed by cold air that sank to the ground. And beyond the clearing, between the trunks, something moved that was not a creature and not a shadow. It was a line. A subtle edge of whiteness advancing slowly through the forest. As it moved, leaves lost their colour, branches became brittle, and the ground hardened. Tarrold remembered Larine standing beneath those same trees, telling him not to look for differences and to come up if he was told. But he had not been told. There was no messenger on the path. There was only this. He picked up the axe again and stepped out of the hut. The cold line had reached the far edge of his clearing. It touched the first of his stacked rounds, and the wood darkened, then shrank. Tarrold stopped as his breath came out in a thicker mist. The mild day was gone and was replaced by winter depths, the like of which he had never seen before. He looked up toward the heights and still felt its presence and solidity. He did not think. He did the only sensible thing left. He turned and ran. The axe slipped from his fingers as he moved. It struck the ground near the stump, and Tarrold did not look back to see where it landed. He ran towards certainty and protection. The cold followed him. It moved through the clearing and into the trees, and he felt it at his back, like a hand that did not quite touch, but could not be escaped. He pounded along the path toward the heights, his boots kicking up leaves, dried to the bone and crackling into tiny fragments. The sweat turned to chill against his skin. He had never felt cold with such intent as this, without weather, night, or carelessness. "Tarrold!" he shouted, and did not know to whom. The marker stone appeared ahead, the one with the iron nail. Tarrold's foot caught on a root, and he stumbled, catching himself on a sapling that broke like a glass stem snapping. He pushed on, swearing and gasping for air. He was a strong man. He was not old. He had carried bundles twice his weight. He could make this walk in 15 minutes easily. But the path had changed. The ground resisted him now, each step heavier than the last. He could feel cold in the soil, rising into his boots and numbing his toes. He reached the marker stone and almost fell against it. The iron nail was frosted, and the stone itself now looked carved out of ice. Looking back along the path, he could see the clearing he had left. The cold line had swallowed it. The hut was still there, but there was no sign of the fire or smoke. Tarrold forced himself to turn forward again. The heights was still visible, closer than before. He fixed his eyes on it and ran. He could no longer feel his own hands swinging at his sides now. He felt only the pounding in his chest and the burning in his legs. He thought of the wood he had stacked, of the work that had been done that day, the mildness of the morning, and the way the forest had smelled. He could not reconcile that with the pain he felt now, trying to force him to stop moving. He saw the path ahead rise slightly, and beyond it, the open ground that led to the height's outer wall. He imagined someone seeing him from a window, coming down, and hands pulling him inside. Then his foot slipped on something, and he went down hard, his knee striking a rock. Pain shot up his leg, and he rolled onto his side and tried to push up, but his arms failed him. He tried to call out. His voice came out as a rasp. "Help!" he croaked, but it sounded ridiculous in the open air. Then the cold reached him and settled like snow on a roof. It moved into his bones and then slowed his thoughts. He could still see the heights and the world around him, but he could not feel his legs. He lay there staring upwards, and a strange calm came over him. Not peace, just simple disbelief. He had done everything as he should. He had worked, tended his fire, and respected the land. His efforts had always mattered. "What are you?" he whispered, and the question was not aimed at the heights or the trees or the magisters. It was aimed at what had arrived without weather or warning. There was no answer. He blinked slowly, and his view of the heights blurred at the edges. He tried to lift his head again, to keep it in sight, but his neck would not obey. His last thought was simple, almost childish in its confusion. This isn't how days are supposed to end. Back at the hut, near the stump where Tarrold had split his last round, the axe lay on the ground where it had fallen, the haft sunk into leaves that had gone stiff and pale. No hand reached for it. It remained there, a tool left behind in a clearing that no longer cared who had worked it.
Order does not always collapse with a warning, or indeed a lesson attached. It fails first for those who did nothing wrong, because they are the ones still expecting the world to keep its word.